again, in the interest of time, we're going to keep going. And our final speaker is Carl June, who's the director of the Center for Cellular Immunotherapeutics at the Perelman School of Medicine at University of Pennsylvania. We may not have time for much of a roundtable, but I think Dr. June is in a position where he's given a lot of these topics a wide spectrum of thought. So I think his talk is going to maybe answer a lot of questions before they get asked. Thanks.
Thanks, Rachel, and Ted for organizing this. So, I'm going to drill down into the space of CAR T cells, and I have support both from Novartis and Community as disclosure. So, when you look just at the setting of personalized therapies, there's a lesson goes way back to Cicero where he said, physicians consider if you've discovered the cause of a disease, you would then know how to treat it. And we heard it took 25 years to make Strimvelis, where I am at Penn, they discovered the cause of leukemia. It was a fusion protein, and activating that Abl kinase, but it did not lead to a cure for leukemia. It took years and years of other research, and so we have very complex issues in healthcare, and it took 38 years really when they found the Philadelphia chromosome to when they actually had Imatinib. So, in my case, I began working in the space of cell therapies. We had TIL therapy and donor lymphocyte infusions in the 1980s. And actually, we had an orthogonal thing with AIDS came along, an acquired immunodeficiency in the 90s, and that's where a lot of the principles of T-cell therapies were learned. We did the first CAR T-cell therapies with cell genesis in 1997, so in HIV, not cancer. And then lentiviral vectors were developed by Luigi Naldini and colleagues, and then that led to what is now become CART-19, and the first cure really for chronic leukemia. And that's our first patient we treated in 2010. He's now 7 years out, and we just published follow-up now in Nature Medicine last month about that patient. So it led to FDA approval. The ODAC happened in July of this year, and there was a unanimous vote in the U.S. for that, and then it was covered in the New York Times. Tim Kripe of Children's Hospital in Columbus said that the CAR T is the most exciting thing he's seen in his lifetime. So it was really an amazing event in the U.S. because no one thought it would be possible to commercialize a complex, personalized gene and cell therapy. Including me. So, but then, the controversies have occurred. The pricing is what we're focusing on here. There was a lot of coverage about it. In Forbes magazine, they talked about Novartis, how they priced it at $475,000, and whether actually that was below what Wall Street wanted it to be priced at. And they kind of came in at a Goldilocks price. And this is what Jimenez said, who is the CEO of Novartis at the time for Kymriah, the CAR. It was less 36% lower in cost price than what it was expected to be. And yet now we have people arguing that it should be much cheaper. So how do you arrive at a cost? And I don't know. We heard earlier about ICER, and there's a web link to this. This is what they looked at for CAR T cells, and they looked both at the Kite product and at the Novartis product, and concluded both for ALL, acute lymphocytic blastic leukemia, which is approved for age 3 to 25, that it's very cost effective compared to what we do right now. So, which was, clofarabine, the most recently approved FDA drug for that. And for the chemotherapy or autologous transplant for diffuse large B-cell lymphoma, it's cheaper than what we do now, but which often fails. So what I learned out of this is, because when we started making cell therapies, I worried about the cost. But if you actually make something that it's curative, it's much cheaper than we do now in cancer, and inherited congenital disease that are non-curative. So that's what we need to develop, and then we need to worry about how you price them and bring that down. So the British have a much better way than we do in the U.S. really of evaluating the cost. And the NICE report is, it's referenced here, is published in 2017, and they looked at it and very carefully the way of CAR T cells and found out that it was actually should be priced at $670,000 rather than the $475 that Novartis did. And that's whether you look at collies and so on, and whether it's a cure. We don't really know at this point because we don't have long enough follow-up, but it does seem to be a cure and for many patients with advanced leukemia. And Novartis then actually, in the case of ALL, did something unprecedented, which was on a pay-for-performance model. So you only get billed, the third-party payer only gets billed if it works. So at a month, if the patient's not in remission, then they don't bill for it. Now, they didn't do that for lymphoma, which was just approved. It has a lower response rate, and they're charging the same price that Kite is, and which is less than for ALL. So the pricing models are not worked out, and it's going to be very different, I think, in Europe and Japan, for instance, than it is in the U.S. So what about the really, if you're the patient, because that's what we need to focus on. What are the side effects? And in children, the side effects of chemotherapy and radiation are awful. I've listed on the right, this is Shannon Mott put this together, a pediatric oncologist at Penn. They come with all kinds of side effects. 85% are cured, but it stunts IQ by 10 to 20 points, linear growth by several inches because of the radiation and chemotherapy. And then patients may or may not have a stem cell transplant and total body irradiation, leading to lifelong complications. On the left is what happens with CAR T cells, and the main side effect at this point is B cell aplasia, which is easily manageable, and we knew that, although it does cost money because of the gamma globulin replacement therapy. We don't know long-term risks yet, but the risk of transformed T cells is very low based on the registries that we have at this point, with over 1,000 patients now treated with genetically engineered T cells. So this swimmer's plot shows what Novartis was able to do. They replicated the data we had at Children's Hospital with a 90% response rate. They had no deaths in their registration trial from cytokine release syndrome, although there was a 48% incidence of that. And so this is the data that led to approval. Now, we also have treated elderly patients with ALL, and this is our first adult patient we treated, who's a professor at the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Center, MD, PhD, Keith Eaton, and he had an incurable kind of leukemia, and it was hypodiploid, and we treated him on our protocol at the University of Pennsylvania in February of 2013, and so our protocol paid for that product manufacturing, but still he ran up medical bills of $500,000, from all the ancillary cares. And he has written about it, it's in a link below in Kaiser Health News about this issue of the other kinds of costs rather than just the sticker price of a CAR T cell or whatever. So we need to look at the whole integrated system and how that's done. And I have no training in that, but that's a big issue. There are evolving articles. So this was a few weeks ago on the Wall Street Journal on an article by Jonathan Rockoff on CAR T cells and the $1 million treatment when you add in the therapies of the price as well as the other hospital ancillary costs. And so they've looked at this, and there was a recent article in JAMA Oncology which said that the cost of CAR T cells, and they looked at background. They actually got this lowballed. I mean, they said it would be about only 30 or 40%, $30,000 or $40,000 over the sticker price of the car. It's actually much more than that, and that's shown here in this Medscape article, how they kind of underestimated the cost at that study at the University of Pittsburgh. So the additional cost actually probably double the total cost of CAR T cells, and our system really isn't prepared to handle that. But I think this is what we actually need to change the conversation, and from pricing in the medical of cell and gene therapy to this, which is excess profits that happen in our IT industry. So if you look for 10 years, the number one performing stock was Apple, and they sell cell phones. They make the most profit. It's not the pharmaceutical industry. And so I think we need to say what society values and how we get profit at Facebook and Google. why, and yet we don't have that, the society hasn't put that into what the value of a patient's life and how pricing can be done. So this is an article about this excess profits issue that we have. So when you look at, this is data from Peter Bach, who's at Memorial Sloan Kettering, and he's looked at issues, and he has a website where you can go and enter in any kind of therapy, and then you put your own value in as to what you think the COLI is. So we heard earlier it's about $130,000 in the U.S. is what our life is valued at per year, and then a toxicity discount. If you have like severe cytokine release syndrome, what he calls the novelty multiplier. So if it's a very new mechanism of action, then you should probably reimburse more for novel drugs. And then the rarity multiplier, which is what Maria Grazia spoke about, and earlier speakers as well, the population burden of disease, the cost of development. So in the case of CAR T cells, our first patient was treated in 2010, and very rapidly it got FDA approval to 2017. But there was 25 years before that of NIH-funded grants and so on that led to the development of cell culture methodology, the Lane-Eval vectors, et cetera. And so how do you bring that in? The prognosis with current therapies versus the new therapy needs to be valued. And then the unmet medical need. I highly recognize going to this drug abacus that he has developed. What we have right now with CAR T cells is they basically replace transplants, hopefully. And an allo transplant, as Maria Grazia pointed out, is very expensive. In the United States, if you have diffuse large B-cell lymphoma, this is data that Richard Mazias has published. He's not an economist, but he's got interest in this issue. In year one, you have $455,000 of costs for your transplant with 38 inpatient days. Year three, where many patients or a subset have graft versus host disease, the health costs are still $72,000. So it's an ongoing charge. We have the issue of migrating to different healthcare, insurance, et cetera. So who pays this bill and so on is a big issue. But the economic burden of a transplant is more than the cost right now of a CAR T cell therapy. And we have in immuno-oncology, if you look, there are now over 700 trials testing different kinds of checkpoint therapies. And we heard, why should we be developing the same therapy really for diseases that have, they're not necessarily common. And this is the trials right now with PD-1 inhibitors. It's incredible. There's, the rise in this and the investment in that. And yet they basically all work the same from what we know. So this is investment that's happening that's redundant, and there are many combinations that are shown here in a recent review in Science. What would really bend the price curve in CAR T cells or any kind of cell therapy with engineered T cells would be if universal or off-the-shelf cells can really work. And there's now, a significant pharmaceutical effort to do this. And the proof of principle was shown at Great Ormond Street Hospital, where children have been now cured, it looks like, with third-party cells, and then, unfortunately, with a bridge to a transplant. So if we can do this, off-the-shelf cells will be much cheaper than the personalized cells that are patient-specific that we currently use. This just says whatever pricing we have, it's going to be very geographically distinct. So if you look around the world right now, there are, for CAR T-cell trials, there are more than 250 trials underway, and most of them now are in the U.S. and China. And how those are going to be reimbursed is going to be very different. And this just shows that these trials that most are now, there are more trials in China than there are in the U.S. I don't know how they're going to pay for those there. Yet most healthcare research, as shown on the right here, is actually, it happens in the U.S. and Europe. That's where the most trials are, and China's third there. So they've specifically focused on developing CAR T cells in China. And so geographically disparate. This is work from Chris Roy, who's at Georgia Tech in Atlanta, and he has put together a consortium of people to try to decrease the cost of manufacturing of CAR T cells. And he's a biomechanical engineer, and there are very novel approaches that are being developed that could drop the cost of T cell manufacturing by at least a log. So I think that's what we're going to see. There's this evolving ecosystem in the areas of cell and gene therapy that involves many different disciplines that will actually bring down the cost of goods now that we see the feasibility to actually do this. So in my little stream of consciousness, what I wrote this morning, CAR T cells are expensive, but the manufacturing cost, I think, within 5 years will go down by a log, by things like viral vectors will get cheaper, or we'll have non-viral manufacturing. It'll be automated. The major cost of manufacturing right now is actually human labor of highly trained people, so it will become automated. If universal third-party CAR T cells actually become available and licensed, that would decrease the cost by 2 logs in rough estimates. And it's possible that market competition will decrease the price of CAR T cells, although that depends on the geographic region you're in. There are more than 50 companies right now developing next generation CAR T cells. So we're at the very early stages of a very innovative and disruptive therapy. And then what is the value to society? I pointed out, we value cell phones and Facebook more than we do our healthcare. We need to change that conversation. That's a political conversation that needs to happen in different geographic regions where the tech industry makes more profits than pharma. So conclude with that. I'd like to thank all the people I work with at the University of Pennsylvania Children's Hospital and Novartis. Thank you.